I answer the question of what if the Earth's core disappeared? So I guess just sort of to start, what is, at a base, what is the Earth's core? What is it? What does it do for us? So the core it's basically a partially solid, partially liquid, super dense, effectively chunk of an iron nickel blend at the center of the Earth. And it's kind of the way it formed. This actually was a question I had as I started looking into this. I was trying to figure out if we would have like a new core form. Probably not, because the way the core formed is basically as the planet was forming, all of those dense, heavier metals just sort of sunk into the bottom and concentrated there. So, got this big old ball of iron and nickel, this sort of orb of still kind of liquidy iron nickel around it. And all this iron nickel makes up a pretty good chunk of the Earth. It's actually about a third of the Earth's mass and almost actually half of the Earth's radius. So on some basic stuff, when this disappears, because it is about a third of the Earth's mass, gravity is going to change. Specifically, it's going to reduce by about that same amount. There's sadly not a planet that has that level of gravity, so I don't have a fun comparison, but it's probably not going to be enough that you get any real, fun impact from that, but it would be less gravity. That's kind of cool. Not going to matter. We'll get there in a little bit. Beyond that, first way this actually goes very badly is that probably the biggest thing that the core does is generate the Earth's magnetic field. It's caused by the rotation of the core. I'm not going to go too in depth into it because we actually had a whole episode about what if the magnetic field went away. That's episode 54 if you want to go find it. The short version is it's bad. The big important thing it does is it stops the atmosphere from being stripped away by solar winds. So that's not great. Once again, not really going to matter, but not good if the core has appeared. What's really going to happen to the planet is actually going to depend a lot on how this happens. And I figured we're going to go sort of in order of how complicated it's going to be to figure out. So let's start with the easy one first. Let's say that the Earth core disappears and it's replaced by a vacuum. This one's really simple. The Earth fills that vacuum explosively, or I guess implosively.
I guess implosively, and then probably explosively.
Yeah, so I think what winds up happening, the Earth isn't a perfect sphere. It's wider than it is tall. So I think what happens is, the mantle rushes in to fill where the core was. And kind of, as it all crunches in, it sort of bow out, further in the middle at the equator and sort of split and spread from there, which is cool. So that one's easy. That one's really easy. It's just the Earth implodes. So that one's pretty straightforward. What if, instead of being a vacuum, it's replaced by air instead? This is similar because once again we still have this big empty space in the middle of the planet. But instead of just explosively filling that void, the mantle is going to spread in at still pretty quickly because there's just this big old pocket in the middle of the Earth, but going to spread in more gradually. Fun fact, this is actually worse than if the planet just implodes. Because what's going to happen is that if there's air now in the middle of the Earth and the mantle is rushing in to fill it, that air has to go somewhere. And where the air is going to go is out, and it's going to go out through all the main means of like volcanic activity. So all that air is going to rush up through, gaps in the Earth's, like the tectonic plates and volcanoes and everything, and basically just cause like apocalyptic volcanic activity.
So slower death for us.
I actually maybe.
I love how apocalyptic volcanic activity is like the tame way to phrase what's happening.
Right, yeah, exactly. Yeah. We all die again, I guess is the big thing. But yes, I actually, it's funny you say slower. I don't actually know if it'll be slower for us.
I imagine an implosive, like the Earth imploding, would be pretty fast for us.
So, yes and no. So the core is like 30, it's like 3,700 kilometers thick. And it actually is a little over half of the radius of the Earth. So it's not going to be immediate. I still think that I think that it actually might be a little bit faster death with the volcanic activity because the air will start escaping immediately as the mantle starts spraying in, as opposed to having some delay on the implosion. Like, not a huge amount because giant vacuum, but it's going to be fast either way, I guess, is what I'm saying. It's not that much slower either way.
Yeah.
So that one's also pretty straightforward. So I was trying to figure out, because there are other things that I would like to talk about here, a way to make this work in a way that we could get to some different ways we die. So let's say that instead of having it immediately disappear, it disappears gradually. It kind of just like there's, a vacuum forming in the middle that kind of keeps getting filled in as the planet contracts to where everything that was core is now, I guess, mantle. What happens then? So once again, we're actually left with two possibilities. I'm going to start with the less fun one first. Fun is relative here. So let's say that the planet actually does survive this whole process, and we sort of crunch down bit by bit and just effectively replace our core with mantle. The planet actually isn't that much smaller. The core, because of the way that, like a sphere works, since it's the middle, it actually isn't a huge amount of the volume of the planet. It's only about 15% of the volume. And that means that the radius of the planet only decreases by about 370 kilometers of its current, 6,370 kilometers. So it's actually not that much smaller. There are a couple of problems. One, there's that whole, previously mentioned magnetic field issue. Maybe more immediately, I'm not sure exactly. And I don't have good numbers on this because I couldn't figure out a way to calculate it. None of our water is going away. So if somehow we survive the core going away and the planet contracting, which admittedly are pretty big ifs, we are going to deal with some pretty dramatically rising sea levels.
Oh, yeah. And we're really just kind of on a rounding error on having land at all anyway, so...
Right, exactly, yeah. So I think there's a couple of things that can happen here. It's either just obviously we all, get crumble into various bits as the planet contracts, or we all get flooded and it's basically a water planet because it's enough smaller, even though it's not actually that much smaller, that the water sort of overtakes everything.
What about those people in the 10% of high elevation? Do they drown?
So, unsurprisingly, there's not good, data on how much sea levels would rise if the core went away. Or I guess if, the planet shrank overall by a certain amount.
Potentially that 6% that die in my situation could survive in your situation.
It's possible. It is possible that a tiny amount live. There is one other problem, and this actually could take place in the more explosive possibilities as well. So obviously there's a lot less gravity on the planet. There's another impact of that aside from just, jumps are fun, which is that the planet is spinning very quickly, and the planet's not necessarily as solid as you might think about it being. And if the rotation of the planet doesn't slow down, what likely is going to happen as the core disappears is, as the gravity reduces, bits of the Earth are just going to kind of slough off into space.
Ooh, good. That's fun.
So, once again, I couldn't get a good, good model of how this is going to happen because pretty far into a hypothetical here. It's entirely possible that in one of those ones where the core just disappears, that's actually what gets us, not the decompression. We just kind of get flung off in all directions, which is maybe more fun. I don't know. But I do think that at a certain point in the gradual loss one, that's also going to start happening. So I would imagine the first to go would be those ones with the high elevations, actually. So probably unlikely that they make it, even if they don't get drowned by the rising seas.
But they get the most fun way to die, in my opinion.
It is pretty cool, I'd imagine. Yeah. So I will say, researching this was a lot of fun because it's rare that I find so many exciting ways for us to die in one question. Usually it's one good one. Here I got 5 or 6.
That was a clip from Absurd Hypotheticals, the podcast where I answer dumb hypothetical questions. For the full episode, click on the link in the description.